get out of that poverty for many factors, and it's resilience to change. And so resilience per se is, I would suggest, is a kind of a mutual concept, and that we therefore be a little more kind of rigorous in saying resilience of what to what. It's like resilience of agricultural production to climate change and increased input costs, or resilience of water ecosystem services to climate change or agricultural intensification, things like that. And the other thought I had in a lot of this is that we often talk about systems, social systems, ecological systems, social ecological systems, and there is a fairly well-established discipline of systems dynamics and systems thinking, at the core of which there is the concept of feedback loops, which can end up sort of, we heard earlier, systems often have resilience to change agricultural systems. And I think some of that thinking could easily be brought in to recognise what are the feedback loops, either positive or negative, just as a common language to help us explore these things.
Thanks very much. I think these are very personal comments, and I'm going to hand over to Mike because he clearly knows an awful lot about these things. But I did observe during the presentations that we heard really quite a number of situations where people were really locked into systems that appear quite durable, but are not necessarily in any way optimal. And that seemed to be something you pick up in your models, right?
Yeah, both those questions were spot on in terms of the resilience of what to what. There is a great deal of general use of resilience. There's a lot of diversity and understanding of what resilience means. In terms of the kind of resilience I'm talking about here, specified resilience is very much about the resilience of what kind of system or what part of a system to what kinds of shock. And that's the only way you can turn this rather vague concept into an operational term that has operational value. And you can build a model on that of how your system works and how it is likely to respond to disturbance events. So hugely important. Then the other remark was about feedback. Yes, understanding feedback is essential to resilience. I didn't touch on it here because it is more technical. And it takes people a while to adjust their thinking from linear ways of thinking about systems to thinking about them in terms of their complexity and the feedbacks that determine the direction that they take. Thank you.
That's great. Any other questions or observations?
Cool.
Ed, please, yes, do.
Just this, what Paul was talking about there, this whole issue of using the word resilience. And for me, it's rather like you ask 20 doctors what their cure for malaria is, and you get 20 different cures for malaria. And it's really like one of our worries in IUCN, certainly in the Secretariat, is we're using the term resilience. Do we really know what it means? And this is part of why I have some of this sort of focus here. We're trying to get to a stage where we have some way we have provide some guidance to people on the ground, the farmer, an NGO, government agency, as to what resilience is. Not necessarily in the fancy diagrams on the right hand, on this side here, the right hand side, but more those attributes. Because that starts to mean something. I can measure things, I can do things, I can learn from stuff. Thanks.
Thank you, Ed. Any more questions? In a moment, I'm going to ask Steve to give us a little wrap-up of everything that he has observed or heard, which I think he's going to go through into tomorrow's session, is that right? The wrap-up that you make from this workshop is going to be taken into further sessions. Yeah. Before I hand over to Steve, any further observations, questions? Please, maybe on the back.
Hi, my name is Holly Booth and I'm from the UNEP World Conservation Monitoring Centre as well. I have kind of a couple of related questions. The first one is, so there's been a lot of mention about food security And I just wondered about the kind of distinction between food security versus food self-sufficiency within the farms. So you talk about food security on a global scale, and I think Mike mentioned that smallholder farmers are kind of at the centre of this huge global system. So are we saying food security in terms of smallholder farmers are going to be supporting everybody as the population increases, which means they can't just be self-sufficient, they need to produce a lot more food? And then linking back to the ecosystem services, I noticed that in a lot of the case studies, ecosystem services are very good for livelihood diversification, except there seems to be limited evidence that organic farming is actually better in terms of productivity and yield for feeding lots more people. I just wondered if anyone had any comments on that.
Thank you very much. Who would like to, from the panel, who would like to pick up the question about food security? Celia, would you like to say a little bit about food security and food self-sufficiency? Is it basically within the farming system, or is it wider than that?
All I can say is from the way we've been focusing on it, it really has been looking at the food security of the farmers in the landscape. So we haven't been asking, are they producing enough to feed people around in a larger scale? We've simply been saying, are they producing enough food to feed their families and to be able to sell a little bit so they at least have some income? So that's been our focus. I think it's quite difficult to look at a much larger scale, though it's very important, because then all sorts of other things that are outside of the actual landscape will influence whether or not that food security is met. Then we're talking about markets, we're talking about transportation, all sorts of other things. What we're focusing on is what's happening within a particular landscape, where we're interested in the communities, we're interested in the ecosystem, we're interested in maintaining what services we can to the farmers. But it's very much focusing on the food security of the farmers per se. But I think there must be other people working on that larger scale, and that's also as important.
Thank you, Celia. You'd like to just add a word? I don't know whether you want to pick up the particular point about organic. And I'm not sure whether we really touched on organic very much.
I don't even touch on the organic very much here. Some of that Chinyanga stuff I explained, there's a massive amount to unpack. But a lot of the value that we were measuring there, quite a lot of this huge increase in cash income value from products sold, of a wide range of products. So it's getting beyond just, it's nearly subsistence, becoming subsistence plus, if you will, which is, it starts to address some of the poverty trap issues, which certainly I'm very concerned with, I've always been very concerned with. But it's moving beyond that and getting to, for example, improved sales of milk for the cash income, for cash into larger cities, improved sales of various planted products into the capital city, cash income and so forth. So there is, in terms of organic, I would suggest a lot of the improvements in Chinyanga have actually been organic, but I wouldn't be able to put a word, I wouldn't put any figures on it, because I haven't seen them using much fertilizer.
Thank you. I think we might have to wrap up the questions now. I'm going to hand over to Steve to give a very brief wrap-up session and say thank you once again. Thanks.
I'm asked to speak into the microphone so you can actually hear me. I hope I haven't been speaking for the hour. But anyway, what have we heard, learned, seen, observed in this incredible array of presentations? First of all, I see a thread that starts with local involvement, local ownership, local empowerment, but ownership not only in the acts that are going on, but problems that are there, and the rights, the opportunities to own the solutions to those problems. It's not a government telling you what to do, but they have that opportunity of their own. That implies a level of empowerment, and that We've heard in one instance it was the leadership of an individual, the foresight of an individual that if you will, a champion, that allowed something to happen. And that's a fairly common thing amongst rural settings. One person stands up and allows something to happen. It may be contrary to a policy that they're supposed to be living with, but it happens. And all of a sudden, you have a whole array of new things emerging from that. So there's an element of risk taking that is associated with that. It's clear that many of these, no, all of these stories, we're clear in that we as humans, people we are part of the land, we are an integral part of the ecosystems that we are endeavoring to manage. We are not observers of ecosystems, whether it's the grapes in Bordeaux or the Senyanga forest. And we tend to want to put us outside and be sort of the solution. We believe that what we think and the ideas that we put forward will solve the problem, when it's in fact the behaviors that we must address if we're going to be successful. And those behaviors, more often than not, need to be tied back down to the people that live with the resources, not with us that sit in the offices that pontificate about those resources. Crisis tends to move people to change. But in the absence of crisis, people will go on doing just bloody hell what they've always done. And one of the things that's actually happening now with climate change is that there's crises occurring that have never occurred before, and it's actually getting people's attention. And we as the conservationists need to act on that. We have some solutions in our pocket and we can help. Those people in Bordeaux, I keep coming back to that, they lost every grape in their vineyards at one point. And they only have grapes today because some guy exported them to California and they came back because of a fungus. All right? They need to understand that the climate that we are entering into today is setting the stage for another round. And diversity in their ecological setting will be to their advantage, not to their disadvantage. At the same time, I live in when you were talking about those landowners, I live in a forested area in northwest Oregon, or northeast Oregon in the United States. And our value is in timber. And everything you said about those vineyard growers can be applied to the people with those forests. Everything that Cecilia said about the way the local farmers rely on the natural systems to get through hard times, I could say about the people that live in my county. It happens all over the world. So, what is all of this down in one sentence? Change happens. Change happens all of the time. And what we're really talking about is putting in place capacities to adapt to that change and sustain the services on which we and other elements of biodiversity depend. It's really that simple. So how do we do that? And I, for one, believe that the starting point is to find ways to give local people greater capacity to engage in the policy discussions. How many farmers are part of the debate? Not many. They don't speak our language. So that would be my recommendation for how you actually make something different. And with that, I want to thank everybody. I think we've run out of time. It's been a great session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.